are watching the multi-awarded Radio Bandido TV on channel 224 Sky Cable and TV Plus boxes. Simulcast on DZRJ 8:10 a.m. Informing, advising, and entertaining the Filipinos and OFWs around the world. Streaming live on www.facebook.com/DZRJ 8:10 a.m. or on YouTube, channel DZRJ 8:10 a.m. Radio Bandido.
The views and comments of the hosts and guests are not necessarily those of the station.
Hello, Philippines, and welcome to the World News Jam right. Hello, Philippines, and welcome to the World News Jam right here in the beautiful city of Makati, Philippines. My name is Eric Lecain here on DZRJ Radio and Radio Bandito TV. So whether you're watching us on Sky Cable Channel 224, Facebook, YouTube, or hearing us on 880 AM radio, we are glad you are joining us here on the Jam. We're talking about the biggest stories going on outside the Philippines so you can stay informed as to everything that's happening around the world. This week, the insane shakeup between the U.S. and Ukraine. And what's China going to be doing in the middle of all this as it develops? Also taking a look at the reemergence of the measles going on in the U.S. A story on the war we never hear about in the Congo. Also some Elon Musk news and much, much more. So thank you so much for joining us this week. Let's get the discussion rolling. This week, in the Ukrainian war, something happened that surprised many of us. Okay, that makes all of us. This week, a Ukrainian comedian went up against a U.S. reality TV star. The prize at stake, the ending of a war that has already killed hundreds of thousands. The comedian is the president of the Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, and the reality TV star is Donald Trump, the president of the United States. Yes, before being president, Volodymyr Zelensky was a comedian. And of course, Donald Trump was a reality TV star before being the president of the most powerful country in the world. So what happened between these two did not happen behind closed doors this week. No one leaked it. This happened on live TV for everyone around the world to watch. Zelensky was at the White House in Washington, D.C. to sign a deal with Trump administration to give them 50% of their rare minerals in their country in exchange for support against Russia taking over their country. This is not something Zelensky wanted to do. The U.S. has had an alliance with Ukraine in the past for many years, along with the European Union. But now the U.S. wants something for its support, and that is its minerals. However, in a matter of 139 minutes, that may have all ended. What was supposed to be a simple photo shoot turned out to be a barrage of insults and false claims against the Ukrainian president. It was one of those moments where people on the side were watching with their mouths hanging open in utter and complete disbelief. Years and years of alliances and diplomacies with the Ukrainians and the European Union just went flying out the window in what seemed to be a scripted takedown, kind of like what you might see in pro wrestling, except that this was real. And people are getting hurt for real. What we saw was the U.S. go with the side with one of its bitter enemies, Russia. Since last week, Trump had already announced that Zelensky was a dictator and that the Ukraine was the cause for the Russians invading their country, something that I don't think anyone, even Putin, believes. But many believed it was just a one-off, and Trump was just playing it up for his MAGA fans. But after this meeting, it seems that the U.S. is moving away from its European alliances and more toward a friendship with Russia, a country that has stepped on and tried to take over a sovereign nation. Started to go off the rails when J.D. Vance, the vice president, started interjecting. Now, Vance is, of course, the vice president. I'm not really sure why he was there. Usually the vice president does not appear at these types of things, much less speak. But in case, he started in with saying that if Zelensky wanted peace, then maybe he should try diplomacy, because that's what President Trump is doing. Speaking in the third person as Trump was sitting right there next to him. Zelensky then said that Russia had attacked them well before the war started, and they tried a ceasefire back in 2019. However, Putin lies. He said he will agree to a ceasefire, but then it doesn't mean that Putin's going to follow it. So what kind of diplomacy are you talking about? So Vance snapped back at him that if he didn't do it, then, well, that kind of it could end the destruction of your country if you would just do this. Then Vance accused Zelensky of litigating the situation in front of the media. Then Zelensky made a reference that the U.S. is separated from this conflict by an ocean, but eventually he will feel the problems that Russia will cause. And Trump snapped that in Zelensky that he shouldn't tell them how to feel. He said, you're in no position to tell us how to feel. He said, you don't have the cards right now. You're gambling with millions of lives. Now, obviously, Trump didn't get what Zelensky was trying to say. So Zelensky said, I'm not playing cards. That the Ukrainians have been alone and that they are thankful for the support. Then Trump started in on how the stupid Biden administration has been and how they hadn't been alone, that the U.S. has given the Ukrainian $350 million, a number that is easy to dispute since we are able to look at the money sent at the U.S. by the U.S. because it's public record. Then Vance started on this thing about Zelensky campaigning for the Democrats in Pennsylvania, in which Zelensky had thanked Biden for all his help, which Zelensky would have done no matter who was in the White House. Then Zelensky said, please, you think that if you will speak very loudly about the war, in which Trump interrupted saying he's not speaking loudly. That's not really what Zelensky meant, I believe. Trump said, you're in trouble and you're not winning. You're not going to win this. You have a damn good chance of coming out okay because of us. It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this, said Trump. It's going to be a tough deal to make because the attitudes have changed. Then Vance said, just say thank you. However, Zelensky has said thank you many, many times. It's all been recorded. It's all been on TV. Anyway, at this point, everyone in the room was wondering what the heck is happening. The ambassador to the Ukraine had her hands covering her face. In less than 10 minutes, the country of Ukraine looked like they became the enemy of the U.S. Trump had said during the tirade that Ukraine was gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is so disrespectful to the country, this country that backed you far more than a lot of people said that they had. Many American politicians who had been in the office for decades said they had never seen anything like what they saw. Many immediately asking if the U.S. no longer is on the side of the Ukrainians. And by the way, are they still going to sign a deal for the minerals? The news conference that was supposed to happen right afterwards was canceled. The lunch was canceled. And Zelensky was told to leave the White House. When they saw Zelensky getting into his car and his envoy, they left. The signing of the deal did not happen. This has now put the Ukraine in a bit of a predicament. Usually when it comes to world leaders, most will cow down to Trump's vanity, compliment on how strong he looks and how beautiful his hair looks, and they will get what they need. Zelensky has now talked back to Trump and contradicted him. He stood up for his country and reminded the U.S. president that the enemy is not him. Now, just a week before, Macron, the French president, visited with Trump. Many have called Macron the Trump whisperer because of his ability to persuade Trump to do things he wouldn't ordinarily do. But even Macron had to correct Trump on the words coming out of his mouth to make sure that the world knew that Europe had indeed was paying its fair share in the war. But it was nice and cordial. It was most obvious that the French president knows how to handle Trump. However, France has not been invaded by Russia. Right after the meeting with Zelensky, Trump asked Zelensky to leave the White House. He tweeted, "President Zelensky is not ready for peace if America is involved because he feels our involvement gives him a big advantage in negotiations." Trump also wrote, I don't want an advantage. I want peace. He's disrespected the U.S. of America in its cherished Oval Office. He can come back when he's ready for peace. There's a journalist after that said Trump had switched sides in the war, and that is the context for a confrontation we just saw. Trump even brought up the Russia investigation from his first term in which Russia clearly interfered in the election. However, Trump has continued to deny that that ever happened. But it's kind of funny, after this crazy standoff in the Oval Office, which has been called one of the most embarrassing moments for any administration, Zelensky went on X, done as he always done, thanks the U.S., thanks the president for all their support, as if nothing had ever happened. He went on Fox News afterwards and said that the spat was not good for either side, but when asked if he would apologize to Trump, he said he would not. He didn't think he'd done anything wrong. There are many applauding him for that. Zelensky needs to not only stand up to the U.S. president, but he needs to make sure his people see him standing up to Trump, which unfortunately basically means he's standing up to Putin. Right now, Zelensky has the support of his people and the support of the Europeans. But is that enough on its own? Is Trump continues down this road of supporting Russia in the war? This will deeply weaken the friendship with the U.S. and the European countries. But one thing is for sure, the alliance between the Ukraine and the European Union just got way stronger. And the friendship between the U.S. and the world just got way weaker. The German chancellor this week said nobody wants peace more than Ukrainians do. Therefore, we are working on a common path to a lasting and just peace. Ukraine can rely on Germany and on Europe. The European Union's foreign policy chief said, "It's clear now that the free world now needs a new leader." The Lithuanian president said Ukraine will never walk alone. And the Estonian's leader said that if Ukraine stops fighting, there will be no Ukraine. Even Canada, Australia, even New Zealand, leaders all speaking out in support of the Ukraine. So this back-turning on the Ukraine from the U.S. dealt a blow to the Ukrainians, however, invariably boosted its friendships around the world. And Zelensky's popularity in his own country has clearly increased since his Trump encounter. His parliament completely stands by their president after standing up to the all-powerful U.S. But the future is now very unclear for the Ukrainians. Anyone can guess that Trump will somehow say that only he can solve the war in Ukraine and that Zelensky is a fool. But even though leaders of the world will not mention Trump by name for fear of retaliation, many are wondering who will step up to the position to lead the free world now. After World War II, the U.S. took that position, and with every president of the U.S., they have stayed in that position, always being the good guy, always having the world's admiration. But what about now? If you ask people around the world, what will they say? Is the world order that we have all known before going to change now? Is the Ukrainian country going to stay strong? Or is it going to be gone by next year? Maybe even having a new name. You know, one Ukrainian officer wrote in a telegram post, He doesn't give a damn about what kind of peace Trump offers. It's better to fight to the death than to freeze the war and then be drained again. I'm not completely sure what that means, but for me, it means no matter the politics, he, as a Ukrainian, will never give up. This is Eric Lecain on the World News Jam on DZRJ Radio and Radio Bandito TV. You know, one thing I think is very interesting is the U.S. has sort of lost its place in the world standing. I mean, who will be the next country to take its place? And who just seems to be standing on the sidelines, watching this all unfold, watching the world take sides against each other, watching all these politicians trying to one up the other? China. I mean, everything that has happened in the past few weeks with the war in Ukraine, the messaging in Israel, the cutoff of U.S. aid. This is the new MAGA U.S. And many countries that you may have never hear about in the mainstream media are wondering, what should we do now? Who should they follow? China is now pitching itself as a pathway to a newer, more safer world, that it can be the one to lead the security and prosperity around the globe. China has long thought that the West had unfairly dominated the world order, the security, the currency. Maybe now it's time for a new sheriff in town. And maybe that sheriff, well, he speaks Chinese. Recently at the G20, China took a more major role to fill in the gaps left by the missing U.S. No U.S. high-ranking member or diplomat showed up, and these countries make up at least 3/4 of the international trade in the world. It was the Chinese chance to accelerate and its ascent to global power, and it obviously has. In the world market, China could start to make its move. That's based on these newly formed tariffs with the United States. I mean, China eyes, why should anyone trade with the U.S. when they can just trade with us? Lately, the president of China has been circling the globe, making deals with the most unlikely countries. We all know how China makes amazing deals to poorer countries, to the old too good to be true deals. But lately, they have been approaching India, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, even France and Germany. I know many countries talk about how we should never trust the Chinese. However, China has recently upped its trading partners. Now it's the top partner of 120 countries. Even though China is consistently threatening Taiwan and always bothering the Philippine fishing boats, they have, for the most part, stayed out of the wars and are still all the wars that are overwhelming in the headlines, while the world is focused on the U.S. president who has forced himself onto every single world conflict. China is safely on the sidelines just watching the game play out. In its speech at the United Nations conference to mark the 50th anniversary for the People's Republic of China joining the UN, President Xi referred to Chinese diplomatic rise in the world, that China is committed to a world order defined by the pursuit of peace, democracy, human rights, and the rejection of unilateralism, foreign interference, and power politics. Now, if you think I made that last sentence up, I'm telling you I didn't. That is what he said. President Xi introduced something called the Global Civilization Initiative, the GCI. It's a way of formalizing these principles with the added purpose of encouraging countries to fully harness the relevance of their histories and cultures and appreciate the perception of values by different civilizations and refrain from imposing their own values or models on others. Wink, wink. This is the previous Global Development Initiative, or GDI, and its Global Security Initiative, the GSI. The GCI will complete Xi's vision for the new international order. It would, as I understand it, remold the world to not constrain the Chinese communism, but rather contribute to its rise. Basically, China is offering its communistic approach as an alternative to the U.S.'s democracy, offering a place for countries like Kazakhstan and Russia, the Sudan, Venezuela to have an ally. As seen in a dialogue meeting with the countries in Beijing, China's vision is embracing all countries from all over the world, even if those don't appeal to the West. Places like Iran and Myanmar. China's always also looking to be the peace broker in the Ukraine, even the conflicts going on ravaging the Sudan. A senior research fellow at the Beijing Center for China and Globalization said China's approach to international relations is defined by a live and let live mindset. In other words, while the West may rely on values and moral actions, China is like, if you want to be the way you are, it's okay for us. So there are countries that are currently enemies with the U.S., and there are those that after this week may have become enemies with the U.S. China looks at this as a big opportunity. I mean, the U.S. changes its presidents every 4 years. So one moment you may have a friend, and then 4 years later, the U.S. is trying to take over your country. Shows the world that sometimes democracy, well, does not work. That having a stable leader for 20 to 30 years is much better. In any case, with the incidents that happened this week, there is clearly a void developing, a void that I never thought I would see in my lifetime. The European countries are starting to wonder if they can ever trust the U.S. again. And what if things just don't turn out? What if that spat that Trump and Zelensky had in the Oval Office turns into other countries standing up to the U.S. as well? Will the Trump agenda of America first also mean America last, or America alone? Some countries just can't wait another 4 years to get another, regular president again. In the meantime, maybe China's a good alternative. Maybe we should all start learning Chinese and stocking up on Juan, learning that beef and broccoli is not really Chinese. This is Lecain on DZRJ Radio and Radio Bandito, talking about stories going on around the world. The measles. Did you have the measles when you were a kid? I actually did not. I had the mumps, which is maybe worse, I'm not sure. But through history of man, people, mostly children, have gotten the measles. Now, children used to die all the time from the measles. Starts around 10 days after you've been around someone who has it. And by the way, if you're in a room with someone that has the measles, you have an 80% chance of contracting it. It's extremely contagious. You eventually will get a fever, cough, runny nose, sore throat. But then something odd happens. When you get these tiny white spots in your mouth, it can be very painful. And then you get the telltale signs of the measles, which is this red, itchy dots all over your face, and then appear on your torso. It can be painful and no fun. But the problem is, well, it's possible that you can die from it. Many people have died through the past several hundred years from the measles, but then people all of a sudden stop dying from it. In fact, they stop getting it altogether, especially in places like the United States. Why is that? Because a vaccine was developed, a vaccine that creates an immunity to the disease. You give it to a child when it's young and it builds up an immunity in their body. So you really need to take it. In fact, most schools require a vaccine before a student can even attend. But that's not what happened in a town in the state of Texas. Right now, Texas, there is an outbreak of measles, and 20 children are in the hospital, and one has died. They currently believe that it's possible that thousands have been infected. They just don't know yet. And this is why the measles is so very dangerous. Parents don't know children have it. And the child goes to school, plays in the park, touches multiple other kids before they even know it has any symptoms. By the time anyone is figured out they already have it, well, too late. Every kid around them has been exposed. But the big question, of course, is why does anyone have this disease at all now? I mean, we have a vaccine, which is something like a 97% success rate. If you look at the chart starting in 1963 in the U.S., just after the vaccine was released, you would be shocked. At the beginning of the chart, the line that represents the number of children who have had the disease is way high. Then the vaccine is introduced, and then the line drops to near zero. So in 1963, 500,000 cases a year in the U.S., and then the next years after the vaccine, it goes down to almost zero. You know, no one has died in the U.S. from measles in 10 years. In fact, in the year 2000, measles were thought to be completely eliminated. So why now are there outbreaks popping up in the place that we didn't have them before? Well, partly because of an ever-increasing movement that's building up in the U.S. following by the anti-vaxxers. They believe that vaccines do not work, that they are just a ploy for us to give money to big pharmaceutical companies, and that the vaccines are actually harmful to our children. One of the biggest, most well-known anti-vaxxers is a man named Robert Kennedy Jr., son of the famous politician Robert Kennedy. This is the man that Trump has made the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Remember this guy? We talked about him before. He's the guy that tied the dead whale's head to the top of his car, hid a dead bear's carcass in Central Park, and had this dead worm that ate part of his brain before it died in his head. You can't make this stuff up. But what he's most known for is that he believes that vaccines are harmful for children and unnecessary. Now, he is very well known for a trip he made to the American Samoan Islands, where he was a part of the movement going on there in the island that vaccines were killing children. A statement that is not true. In any case, after he went there was an outbreak on the small island and thousands got the measles and 83 people died. Now, the issue started there years before when a vaccine was not properly prepared, and it was an inexperienced health worker, and anyway, 2 babies died. So the government there got the idea that vaccines can kill your children. Not true. Kennedy, who headed the Children's Health Defense Organization, that's an anti-vax group, went to the island of about 200,000 people to push his ideas on the dangers of vaccines and the alternative solutions. Well, a few months later, the island was forced to go into lockdown because the measles had spread all over the island. So why on earth would Trump pick someone like this to run the Health and Human Services Department of the U.S.? Well, because Kennedy was running for president, and when he realized he could not win, he told Trump that he would endorse him if he could be head of the HHS. Now, during his Senate confirmation hearing, Kennedy claimed that he did not cause the outbreak on the island of Samoa. He said he went in June and the outbreak didn't happen until August. Of course, many senators went into a rage about this statement because August is 2 months after June. And Kennedy went there to meet with the head of the anti-vax group that was telling everyone not to vaccinate their children. And now there is an outbreak in Texas. And the reason for this outbreak is that there is a huge part of the population in that city that believes in the anti-vax misinformation that's being spread there. And now it is reported that the measles is spreading into the state of New Mexico. That's right next to Texas. Now, is the measles going to spread across the U.S.? Probably not, because most of America is vaccinated. However, the person that believes vaccines are dangerous is now able to influence many people. People will pay attention to the information the HHS gives out. Now, to be clear, all the people that have contracted the measles so far in Texas are unvaccinated. But here's the thing. Right now in the U.S., there are measles outbreaks in Alaska, California, Kentucky, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York City, and Rhode Island. Why? Because there are people there that are unvaccinated. So, why are we having all these outbreaks? It's almost entirely due to the people believing that vaccines are harmful. I mean, during COVID, there was a huge drive to tell people that the COVID vaccines were harmful in the U.S. People like Kennedy going on social media to tell people that they would die from taking the vaccine. And what happened? Well, U.S. led the world in deaths from COVID, and the number one reason you would die from COVID, you did not get the vaccine. At the news conference the other day, Kennedy said they have it under control and the people are showing symptoms are being quarantined. However, the health officials in Texas are saying that they are not in the hospital to be quarantined. They are in the hospital because they have the measles. Now, the measles is not like COVID. First thing, the measles is way more contagious than COVID. And secondly, COVID affected mostly older people. Most of the deaths were people over the age of 50, while measles affects infants and children mostly under the age of 5. But what Kennedy has pushed over the years is not only that vaccines can cause death, but also that it is the reason for autism in children. Kenny believed in a popular theory by discredited Dr. Andrew Wakefield, who figured out the link between the two. But since then, his theories published have been completely debunked by everyone who has anything to do with this subject. A doctor in the UK made a statement that he is worried the U.S. will take a huge step backwards by having someone like this in charge of the nation's health. And he worries that this influence and misinformation could spread to other countries around the world. Now, besides vaccines, Kennedy also has attacked fluoride for being put in the water supply, which is proven to stop tooth decay. Kennedy has said that he wants to remove fluoride from the water supply in the U.S. altogether because, according to him, it can cause arthritis, bone fractures, bone cancer, IQ loss, neurodevelopmental disorders, thyroid disease. He also has many concerns about the additives in food, that the ultra-processed food we eat is causing obesity and cancer. Now, I'm not saying I don't disagree with this. However, at current, there's no actual substantial evidence that UPFs are causing obesity and cancer. However, eating too much food, such as those with artificial sweeteners and colors, can and does cause obesity. But one of the big things that Kennedy is known for is his claim that the COVID virus was engineered to target white and black people, not Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese. He said that even though many Jews and Chinese died of COVID, what I'm trying to say is, he's saying this, but in any case, Jews and Chinese, many of them have died. Now, Kennedy has also said all these things later denied, and he said, saying that, well, maybe he was misunderstood in what he was saying. Most of these claims happened leading up to his confirmation to lead the HHS. So, in any case, what will be interesting to see in the upcoming months is how will Kennedy handle this outbreak of the measles, a disease that he said is much better if you get the disease because it'll make you immune to it. So you will suffer a lot and you may die, but you will be immune to it later. So we will wait to see if more die from not getting vaccinated and how Kennedy will explain his views about vaccinations. One quick note, Kennedy has his own kids vaccinated. This is Eric Lecain on the World News Jam on DZRJ Radio and Radio Bandito TV, talking about stories going on around the world. Does anyone know what coltan is? It's a black metallic ore which contains columbite and tantalite. It's mostly used in smartphones, laptops, even electric car batteries. The one thing about coltan is that it's not that easy to get. It's only mined in a few places around the world: Brazil, Canada, and the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. We don't hear much about the Congo in the international news, but we have this week because there is a war raging in the Congo right now. Almost a forgotten or hidden war, but it's really as big as any of the other more flashy wars, maybe even bigger. 3,000 people were killed this week. But even though we're just hearing about the Congo a lot right now, this war has been going on for decades. It really started back in 1996. Remember the genocide that was occurring in Rwanda at that time? The Hutu and the Tutsi. The Hutu went on a killing spree and hacked up nearly 800,000 Tutsis with machetes. Then the Tutsi managed to get control of the country back, but then millions of people fled to the Congo, fearing reprisals. This included the Hutu fighters. Since then, it seems like there has been a war between the Congo and Rwanda that just never ends. But the real war, or the Second Congo War as it's called, is when the conflict really reached a different level. I believe that maybe 5 million people have died since the start of that new level. Some say it might be 3 million. Some say it's even higher than 5 million. But does it matter at this point? But it's reached levels of death same as World War II. Now, many of the deaths are civilians, based on mostly disease, malnutrition, but still, it's a lot. So, many of those Houthis made it over the border into Rwanda. Well, they started to regroup and reform. Because of that, there is now a group called M23. They're the ones that really seem to be causing a lot of the trouble right now. They have recently taken over Goma and Bukavu, out on the eastern border of the DRC. But the question is, are these people from the Congo or are these Rwandans? And whose side are they really on? Some believe that as many as 3,000 to 4,000 Rwandas are in the DRC right now, kind of disguised as M23. Of course, Rwanda denies this, but also says doesn't really know if Rwandas are helping the M23 people out or not. I mean, many say it's impossible that M23 could have done all this on its own. They didn't have the firepower or the money to pull off something like this. So the Rwandas must be helping them. Gets kind of complicated because we have to remember the Rwandans came into the DRC back in 1996 to get the Houthis that escaped, which kind of sparked the first war in the first place. And they removed the then president, put in a new president. But then they had a problem with that administration, and then that started the second war. That went on for years. But then they signed a peace deal, which didn't last very long at all because there were multiple groups involved in that conflict, each having its own agenda. But Rwanda agreed to this, but it never really caught on. They just kept fighting. So now, let's jump to the present day. It's still going on. The war has never really stopped. And now they have M23, which is made up of Tutsi rebels in the Congo. And with the backing of Rwanda, they are very powerful now. They are taking cities and holding on to them. Like I said, it's a bit of a surprise to many. They have the organization, the discipline, the firepower of a trained military group. In fact, many are asking, are the Rwandas helping them? Or are the M23 soldiers just helping the Rwandan army? Now, the M23 soldiers are saying that they are doing this to protect the Tutsis that are in the DRC, the ones being persecuted in the Congo, which is still kind of questionable. But they're also saying that they're going after the Houthi extremists, which are hiding in the Congo, especially the FDLR, the Forces Democratic Liberation of Rwanda, which Rwanda still sees this group as a total security threat. They are calling them terrorists, and they could strike Rwanda at any time. Could be something completely different. And here's where we get into the reality of the situation. In the eastern Congo, there is coltan, which is used to make your cell phone. There's not just some there. There's a lot there. And Rwanda took over this the mineral mines. They went and took in over that just to get that. And M23 really managed to take over a mining operation called 𝗪𝗪𝗱. Once they got control of this mine, they bought it. They bought it. They've been selling it for around $800,000 they got per month, around 45 million pesos. The minerals are being exported to foreign countries by, who do you think? Rwanda. Maybe believe all this money and the backing of Rwanda will lead to M23 taking over the whole country of the DRC? But the government of the Congo has said they are ready to fight the M23 and has called them a terrorist group. But the Congo army is considered very unorganized and full of corruption, and there are militant groups that refuse to be absorbed into the Congolese army. They will fight, but not with the country's military. So, as we can imagine, there's a lot of infighting when it comes to resources and money. Meanwhile, the DRC has asked other countries to put sanctions on Rwanda and not buy resources from them, such as minerals that were taken from the DRC. So far, there have been some pauses on aid going to the country, but not stopping the mineral trade. I'm sure the deals that the European countries are getting right now are pretty good. Right now, it seems Western politicians are fairly reluctant to go against Rwanda. The president there has made some very tight, close-knit relationship with the Europeans. So unless the international community starts to sanction Rwanda and turn off the tap of money going to them, many believe this war will continue for another 30 years. But of course, who suffers in these conflicts? It's the people, of course. There were already 1 million people in the camp in Goma just trying to survive. But when the M23 took over the city, all those people were ordered to leave. Where do you put 1 million people with no money, no place to go? So what did they do? They returned to where their homes were, their homes which have been burnt to the ground. There's little to no security, so women and children live in fear of being raped by soldiers, other men in the camps. You must hide your food, that is, unless the aid groups get robbed first. But the worst are the accusations that the M23 is executing children there. It's really gotten that bad. And these people in the Congo, they have so very little to do, if anything, with this war. They were just born on a piece of land that has minerals used in your smartphone. This is the reason they must suffer. Some groups, such as UNICEF, say this could be the worst humanitarian crisis they have ever seen. Makes you think, doesn't it? There was a part of your cell phone that was dug up in the Congo. We will be updating you on the conflict going on there. But for now, it looks like as if it's only going to get worse. This is the World News Jam on DZRJ Radio right here in the Philippines. I'm Eric Lecain. So let's update you on a story we were talking about from last week. And by the way, this is the most asked question from Filipinos to me this week, and it's about Elon Musk. Now, last week, Musk was, of course, firing anybody and everybody that works for the U.S. government. Why is he doing this? Well, to trim the U.S. budget and cut down on wasteful spending. Last week, we talked about Musk, who had demanded that every government worker send him an email telling him what they did last week. And if they don't, well, that would be their resignation. Well, Musk also showed up at the conservative event of CPAC, walked on stage wearing a black clothes and black sunglasses and holding a large chainsaw over his head, basically a metaphor for cutting jobs at the federal government. He yelled, "This is the chainsaw for bureaucracy," as the crowd cheered. But the problem with Musk and his people at Doge is the jobs they are cutting are done by middle-income Americans. I mean, the government really doesn't pay that much anyway, and many are saying that there are now departments that are way understaffed. But Musk is pushing back, claiming that many of these jobs are not necessary, and that the deep state and the Democrats are full of fraud and abuse of taxpayers' money, such as the issue he has with U.S. aid. Musk has gutted that office and shut down all of its programs, including feeding programs, and the program is trying to contain a serious outbreak of Ebola, charities, humanitarian projects in which Americans are left in faraway countries not knowing what to do next. Many of these jobs, even stateside jobs, the workers are just not doing this for the money because it's low paying. They're doing this to help people from around the world. Many of these shutdowns have turned out not to be completely legal even. In fact, the courts are now telling the Trump people they have to stop what they are doing. In fact, several courts have told Trump he has to release funds to the U.S. aid, and to do it right now. But Trump has appealed the decision all the way to the Supreme Court, and on Wednesday, the court blocked a ruling from the Court of Appeals telling Trump he had to stop this. Go figure. The U.S. has given aid to other countries for many decades, especially in places where there are hardships caused by storms or wars. They have tried to stabilize governments and economies, and by doing so have made many alliances. But Elon and the Doge see this as a waste in spending. In other words, Musk is saying the Trump administration is no longer interested in helping other countries, not unless they are getting something in return. And they are going to do these things if they benefit America. By the way, just to be clear, Musk is South African. But the problem Musk is having is that it looks as if he's cutting projects that don't benefit him, or he doesn't understand. I mean, cutting research teams looking into the bird flu epidemic that's currently ravaging the U.S. Musk has already gotten a lot of these criticisms, this by pushing on these cuts. But he said, we will make some mistakes, just part of doing the job. So there you go. But speaking of mistakes, this is where you look at something that makes you go, Currently, Musk is firing everyone he can at the FAA. That's the government agency that looks after the places airplanes fly. Now, there have been 3 major air disasters since Musk started doing this. I'm not saying he caused the crashes. It's just an observation. Anyway, the system they use to run the air traffic controlling is old. The U.S. government wants to upgrade it. They picked Verizon to do the upgrade. Now, this is a $2.4 billion contract to provide a long sought-after replacement to the FAA's communication system known as the FAA Enterprise Network. But turns out that Elon Musk also has a communication system under Starlink, his own company. So Musk wrote this week on X, the Verizon communication system to air traffic control is breaking down very rapidly. The FAA assessment is a single-digit months of catastrophic failure, putting air travelers' safety at serious risk. The situation is extremely dire. In other words, the system Verizon is putting in, according to Musk, is not working. But there's one problem. Verizon has not put any system in yet. Verizon put out a statement that another company, not Verizon, is running the FAA systems currently in place, which is true. The air traffic control system still is working on the old system, and Verizon is not due to install theirs until next month. Verizon spokesman said, "Our company is working on building the next generation systems for the FAA, which will support the agency's mission for safe and secure air travel. We are at the beginning of a multi-year contract to replace antiquated legacy systems. Our teams have been working with the FAA's technology teams, and our solution stands ready to be deployed. We continue to partner with the FAA on achieving its modernization objectives." So then, what is Elon talking about? Well, right after that statement from Verizon, a post came out from Elon Musk. It says, correction, the ancient system that is rapidly declining, the capability was made by 𝗪𝗲. The new system that is not yet operational is from Verizon. Of course, it's not yet operational because it hasn't been installed yet. But what we learned this week is that the newly installed head of the FAA that Trump put in may be looking to change the contract around, get rid of Verizon, and instead put Elon Musk's company Starlink in control of this project. To everyone's surprise, it seems Musk has already given the FAA a few Starlink terminals to test in an Alaskan area. So in other words, Musk is able to cut the people from the FAA and remove the contract with Verizon and push the FAA to reassign it to a company that he owns. So as you can imagine, multi-red flags are going up all over the place. Several senators have come forward to ask, how could this be happening? Contract bid was given to Verizon years ago, worth $2.4 billion over 15 years. How could that be changed because a government employee, Musk, just happens to own a similar business? This had the government corruption written all over it. This is how things sometimes get done in Russia. There are contracts for utilities and oil, etc. And then all of a sudden, President Putin also happens to have a company that does the same thing, the company that the contractor has. And all of a sudden, the contracts get pulled and given to Putin, who owns this company. Of course, in Russia, that is when the owner of the competing company is thrown in jail and his company is absorbed by Putin. This is what is happening there. Is it happening here in the United States? The U.S. Transportation Secretary has said that they are allowing SpaceX engineers to modernize the U.S. traffic control systems following the deadly crash of the American airline and the military helicopter. But that accident seems to have been caused by short staffing, not the air traffic control system itself. Maybe the question should be to fix the staffing problems. Obviously, I don't have the answer, but just repeating what everyone is already thinking. And I'm not the only one. But the big problem seems to be, does Elon own the company wanting the contract and also running the government that gives those contracts? One thing is for sure, Verizon's not going to take this lying down and let Musk take away its contract. I'm assuming Verizon is currently already preparing its probable upcoming court case. Things just keep getting stranger every single week. And this is Eric Lecain on the World News Jam, talking about stories going on around the world. Let me ask you, you ever seen the movie The Quick and the Dead? I love that movie. How about Mississippi Burning, or the original Superman, or Bridge Too Far, or Behind Enemy Lines? What about The Replacements? That was such a good movie. I could spend the whole rest of the show naming movies that Gene Hackman has been in, but we don't have near enough time. He was one of the greatest actors of our time. These days, where it seems to be an actor, you need to be good looking and have a perfectly built body. But Gene Hackman was one of those actors that was just talented. He had recently retired from acting and had settled down in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Far stretch from being in Hollywood, he married a pianist, 𝗪cie𝗪𝗀𝗀, about 20 years ago, and that's where they lived, doing yoga and Pilates and going to art shows. But all that ended for the couple as they were both found dead this week in their home along with their dog. Turns out they may have been dead there for maybe 10 days before someone finally found them. Gene was found in the entryway on the floor, and his wife was found in the bathroom. Looked like she just fell abruptly because her head was right next to the space heater. There was no signs of carbon monoxide poisoning or a gas leak, no signs of gunshot, wounds on the body, no indication of a struggle. They just fell over dead, along with their dog. According to the authorities, it not appear to be suicide. Nothing appears to be taken from the house. A maintenance worker who called the police and said all the doors were locked when he got there. As of right now, we still don't know what they both died from and how they died at the exact same time, along with their dog. You know, Gene Hackman, he acted for 81 years, had 79 movies, won 2 Oscars, and never had a bad performance. He was 95 years old. His friends said his wife was very protective of him, that they seemed like real-life partners, really, really close to each other, and they were both
The views and comments of the hosts and guests are not necessarily those of the station.
She was of him. They were a perfect couple. Gene Hackman, dead at 95, along with his wife and their dog. This is the World News Jam on DZRJ Radio and Radio Bandito TV. Thank you so much for joining us today on our discussion on things going around the world. Hope to see you next week right here on the World News Jam again. I'm 𝗪cie𝗿𝗀𝗱, and we will see you next week.
The views and comments of the hosts and guests are not necessarily those of the station.